Here also Leo Watson, and then KatieLee, and then Dr. Midi as well, who have joined us on this panel. Now, John is going to go first, give a bit of a kōrero, and then Leo, and then our other panellists will give a brief comment as well, and then we'll open it up to pātai from there. So please join with me in thanking our panel for joining us today.
Thanks, Jace. I've just got to do something. My granddaughter won't let me travel around the world without one of her friends coming with me. Oh, Geneva was a little smiley face, so haven't got the name. That's an illegal at the moment. So, kia ora. I'd like to pay my respects to traditional custodians and the lands we're able to speak on today, and elders past, present, future and emerging. For us, I'll give a snapshot about basically who I am culturally, but we've always resonated with the living generations, grandparents, parents, children. It's that consistent thing that rolls through our families. My grandmother's country is Kukamini Kukuyalanji in Cape York. Some of the things I'll show you later, you'll sort of see what we're sort of working in that space for us as Yalanji people is the tribal group, Kukamini is the clan group. My grandfather's country is Mullumbara Yidinji. Mullumbara, it's where rainforest bummer, which is wet tropics rainforest in North Queensland. Yidinji is the tribal group, Mullumbara is the clan group. Professionally, where I really started to get moving in this space was I was a project manager with the Director General, the EPA in Queensland, one of 6, and doing some sort of groundbreaking things and what the department and what his projects were and what we were trying to achieve. Some of those things were first entity in the state to get an in-principle agreement with the Anti-Discrimination Commission on developing Indigenous identified roles. So instead of having to go back each time, we developed a policy and we were able to do it in and out, and originally where the Indigenous Ranger programs emerged from, out of those sorts of roles. Then later on, after a couple of years with him, he wanted me to merge 2 units, basically around policy and planning, and bring them into one unit. So we thought about a really different approach at that time around cultural awareness, and we thought more about cultural capability. So ours was a process about looking at multidisciplinary approaches, and my team would be embedded in other teams, marine planning, biodiversity, whatever it may be, and bringing those capabilities quicker into the policy and legislative and strategy space. And then after spending over a decade or more in that space, decided to get out and do my own consultancy work. I work as a biocultural diversity specialist, strategist. Was originally doing projects, but now I'm more in strategic place. So I've got some friends here. It's good to see KatieLee again. So her and I are on UN ad hoc working groups on DSI and genetic resources. I've worked in the 8J, traditional knowledge stuff as well. I currently sit on the National Committee on Aboriginal Water Interests, so the big water reform stuff that's happening in Australia. TIEC, which is the Tropical Indigenous Ethnobotany Centre. I did sit on the Wet Tropics World Heritage Scientific Advisory Committee. I think all that stuff has just resonated around some of the things that I'm currently on and will move to later this year. Into a chief investigator's job on something that Daniel spoke before with the Chilungan Aboriginal Corporation, who has global patents on an oil made from uncha, traditional medicine, and I'm seeking to sort of how we work in that DSI space and so on. So quickly, I just got to, I hope this works. So just to give sort of snapshots, and it goes back to some of the things earlier that I picked up on one of the key questions about how do the rights and rights of nature intersect with the rights and interests of our peoples, and then the voice and decision making. So basically what we've really been focused on is spatial intelligence. So if you think about in Australia, for me, it's the way our structures are. And if you look at the one on the right, on the left-hand side, that's actually Pinewood landscape. It's a rainbow serpent hydrology landscape, and that's the way that we actually define our particular landscape scales. You know, whether it's a language group, so I belong to Cook-speaking people. I don't speak my language because Dad moved. He wanted to play with trains all his life, so he became a train driver. So he couldn't stay in his country. But basically, those structures are built around hydrology, catchment line, rivers, creeks, springs, and it's a consistent thing in our country. But what we thought was, because we deal with the spatial intelligence like that, how do we then harness it and bring GIS into our space and think about it in that way? So when I hear development, my mind always goes to the strategic side, which is before you develop a strategic plan, for example, or a regional plan, a schema or a plan for a region, a shire. The precursor to that is good spatial planning. It's about key aims like territorial cohesion, about access to knowledge and information, cultural heritage as a factor for development, not in development. And so it's the opportunities that sort of provides. And if we haven't got that, then it also impacts how we may access funding for different sectors that we're in and what we're trying to achieve. So spatially, the one on this side is really important. What walls we've done there is the same map basically, but we've underlaid regional ecosystems. And if you can see it, see the little white words. It's amazing how many of those different parts of that regional ecosystem replicate the clan structures. You know, and we spoke earlier about giving a voice, those key questions that were on the board that Manuel had about giving or looking at the intersection between the rights between nature and human, and also around giving them a voice. This particular map we'd done for Consultation for World Heritage in Cape York. And so a really good friend of mine, Dave Claudy, who's now passed, him and I, the architects of ISI mapping, Indigenous spatial identity mapping, at any scale and the way that culture operates. And to be able to think about that, you know, we don't have that territorial cohesion and regional planning in the country, and it should be there. We should be able to define the value of natural capital in an economy and make really sound arguments about the way forward, you know. And state development agreed with that. I did a big project, Sunshine Coast, for example, and made planners really realise about they should be looking this way. We should be designing a landscape language that is common to you as a planner and to us as cultural planners. So this one also, just quickly, if you can see the blue part out on the edge, that's the Great Barrier Reef Lagoon. Old knowledge is still there about the discharge areas under the ocean, the wonky holes, the water columns that come up, the freshwater water columns. And people know their way out to those through the mosaics in the reef. So the old knowledge is still there when the Sahul Shelf was ground and where those systems were. So it's trying to draw on that thing about knowledge and law and custom. And this basically just gives a quick snapshot. We're thinking about how do we always continue to develop, in a spatial sense, trusted systems. So the purple part of that image over there is a trusted system under ANZLIC, so it's common between us and New Zealand, the Spatial Information Council, and the Foundation Spatial Data Framework, and in there are all different GIS files, or themes basically, and the purple is just land, parcel and property. That's 138,000 hectare parcel property that my family and 2 other clan families own. We're white cockatoo on the other side of the Palmer River, and the black cockatoo guys on the other, Bidram and Katinji are the 2, the 3 clan family groups. So we're trying to put shape to that in the way that we would develop. And I've even had a mate of mine who's a rugby mate of mine who was the chair of the Queensland Planning Institute. And him and I actually went and met with our elders around doing the spatial, but how we might culturally master plan a cultural landscape and really make sense of it. So there's things in there, for example, where water comes out, the discharge areas, springs, they're classed as poison water. So along a part of that system from the poison water port down to a certain part of that creek system, only elders can live along that section. And then till after that, then you can access the water past that point. So it's bringing all this sort of traditional governance into these sorts of spaces. And I think the point that Miri made around cultural governance, the previous picture with the World Heritage one was to look at a way that governance may operate. And for that group, it was thinking about it, theirs was thinking about it from what's called Kapakoyan. And Kapakoyan is the way that biodiversity and biocultural diversity exist. And we spoke about species and where they sit in that governance. There are ways through. And the ways through are that governance and decision making under customary law holds codified elements within law and custom. And that part is that each of the, for example, the 30 odd clan groups that are in that primary landscape, they all are fused by bird, reptile, mammal, and where Paimu is the initial creator, and then iwi, the crocodile, is the reptile, came together to create the other two, where there is an inability to make a decision, as Dave said, then it will revert back to iwi. So there are ways in culture that these things operate. It's just about understanding, for me as a biocultural diversity strategist, is understanding the way that customary law and knowledge operate. So whether it's the first part around explicit and tacit, and then the implicit side of things, the way that knowledge operates, then that brings the thing around memory, and memory is about, on the first two, is about recall, and the way that is recalled in terms of their relationship with that landscape, what their responsibilities are in terms of cultural authority. I differentiate between culture and customary. Culture can be the everyday thing that occurs in our cultures, whereas the customary stuff is that high-level principles around customary law, around the things that are codified in what we can and can't do in landscapes, the way that relationships. So benefit sharing is not an odd thing to us. It's always been there. We know our responsibilities and obligations both upstream and downstream. And the really interesting part for me at the moment, which came up in Geneva, was I said about Joe, who's one of our guys from North America. He deals with, and he was talking about eDNA. Well, if something in the high country, and in the other map that I showed you, something comes out of my place in the high country, which we're in the elevation, and goes all the way down, but pops up in those wonky holes under the GBR lagoon, and with EDA they're getting DNA out of the water, then that's what I mean about the upstream, downstream. We know those things and responsibilities. So there are some really good ways forward in terms of just exploring them and working through it. And then the opportunities that sort of fall out of different things. It will be quite interesting the way that maybe some of our relationships form globally. You know, Indigenous eye to eye is what friend Darren Godwell explained, how we as Indigenous peoples in different parts of the world come together and start creating our own Indigenous business sectors. You know, sometimes we're hidden, we're invisible inside other industries like agriculture or tourism or whatever it may be, but recreate it in terms of what we want to do. And this one was a friend of mine who was part of the biohubs. They build biohubs. This one was the council in Bundaberg. Really interesting thing from there was energy, and they did a research on how much energy was used in that shire, and it was 730 million. And the consultant said, imagine if this community could generate 10% of that, which meant that every year we in that community were working out how to spend 73 million. It wasn't going back outside. everything was boring. So it's just those sorts of thinking, and I think today it's just, for me, it's just seeing all the different things that are being spoken about, how we really get these conversations moving. Thanks, guys.
Ko rangi nui e tūaki nei, ko papatu anuku e takoto nei tihei I Māoriora. Ki tā hau kāinga, he piko he taniwha, he piko he taniwha. Mihi mai Ngāti Hau, koutou o tā hau kāinga. Tēnā koutou. O te rā, tēnā tātou, I roto I tēnei kaupapa whakaharahara. E pai ki te hara mai I Waingunui a koutou. I pāna ki tēnei kaupapa rōroa. Kaupapa nunui. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko wai tēnei, ko Leo Watson tōku nei ingoa e noho ana au ki here taunga. Ko aku nei tamariki no Ngāti Kahununu ki here taunga rā. Nō reira, ka kaui amai nā mihi o te mātau a Māui ki a koutou I tēnei rā whakaharahara. Tēnā koutou. Thank you for inviting me to participate. Just a warm acknowledgement of te kotahi and the work that you do. Manu and all your team, Maui, of course, who's, I understand, not here, and the invitation to come and share some of the mahi that we are doing in the Y262 space, but then again, we're all in the Y262 space. So part of my acknowledgement, rightly so, goes to those kuia and kaumātua who really were so innovative ahead of their time to see what was happening with intellectual property rights and to lay down the pou of what tikanga, what custom law meant, and what the challenges and opportunities were. I think of Del Wihongi and her staunchness about that, and then I think of Sana Murray and her incredible accommodation of different worldviews. And she always came back to aroha, that if the platform is right, then actually when we're talking about benefit sharing, there are benefits to all. And it's a message sometimes that we focus on benefit sharing in terms of the challenges to regain the benefits to come back to iwi take, back to Indigenous peoples. But from there, as I've understood it from those kuia, those benefits actually translate to better benefits for our world, both in terms of sustainability of our resources and our longevity on this planet, but also for the economic, social, cultural uplift of everybody. So I just carry those sort of messages in the back of my mind as I try to do justice in a very short space of time to a really, really massive kaupapa. Katie, Marsh Solomon, if you just want to wave, you're here as part of our backbone for this re-emergence of the claimant vision after so many years. So I was legal counsel along with Maui Solomon and others when I first cut my teeth and back in 1996 in the hearings for Y262 and was privileged to be able to drive those kuia around and listen to their kōrero. And from there, over the last however many years that is, I've been privileged to be part of the Y262 kaupapa. At the moment, I'm standing in my role as legal advisor to the Y262 Taumata Whakapumo, which was a group established in 2020 to reflect and maintain and uphold the mauri, the life force of the claim, as we headed into solutions focused. And I know that this particular section is about pathways to solutions, so that's what I'm going to try and focus on. I want to acknowledge Nanaia Mahuta for her leadership at the time. They came out of a period of complete silence and ignoring the Y262 claimants since the report was released in 2011. It led to a massive fracturing and a loss of resource within the claimant community. And her leadership from a government's point of view was to say, we need to talk with you. And out of that got born this rōpū again to reflect the claimant's aspirations, but really importantly, to extend those aspirations out to kaitiaki around the country. So that's my mihi to you as te kotahi and the invitation to us. One of the key messages I bring is an absolute commitment from the Y262 taumata to collaboration. We have to do this together. We have to create a momentum here And I just want to endorse, I'm so looking forward to reading the guidelines that have been produced, hearing the kōrero today. We're actually all on the same pathway. The synergies are incredible. Some of the work that I won't even be able to get to talk to today, I just want to wave at you all and say we're here. We're also doing very similar stuff. We want to extend and enhance our collaborative work with you and with others in this area. The same goes for the Crown, kei te mihi kia koe Lane, me tō rōpū. The Crown through Te Puni Kōkiri, who have been leading, of course, the Te Pai Tāwhiti Crown program, have supported the Y262 taumata whakapūmau in their mahi. I don't know whether that support is guaranteed. I know that's obviously, whenever you hear a bureaucrat talk about fiscal constraints, you get worried. But also, this doesn't depend on the Crown's funding. It depends on the Crown being an active partner to protect what Māori as kaitiaki are wanting. And I've got to say that there have been marked improvements in the way in which the Crown has approached that over the last few years. I'm really worried personally about the direction it may be going, and all the more reason to keep those relationships strong, to show them that there is progress being made in terms of delivery of outcomes, which is what I want to talk to, and to show the collaboration in this room as we're all working on the same project. I would hate the duplication to mean that there is a possibility of divide and rule in due course around outcomes that land, because, you know, putting Lane to one side, the Crown is well known for that tactic to make sure that this continues to just go incredibly slowly. So another message, apart from collaboration and the mihi to you in terms of your work, is to just perhaps paint a little bit of what we're doing in the space called Tiaki Taonga, which is a broad branding phrase that relates really to Y262 claimant vision for a framework of the protection of mātauranga Māori and taonga generally. And out of that framework come a myriad of opportunities and mechanisms. One of the key mechanisms that we're working on in terms of our, what we call the te tikanga phase, the working on solutions phase, is obviously the sui generis standalone model protection framework, which certainly can be supported and should be by legislation, but actually evolves organically from a kaitiaki worldview. That worldview is then not just tapped onto existing intellectual property rights systems. That's been the major problem all the way through. It's been the same message that Dell and Sana and other claimants cried out way back. They said the intellectual property rights system is not the fit for tikanga Māori, for mātauranga Māori. We need an alternative that is ably and enabled to stand alone with Crown support. So that project is a massive one. You're all part of it. It actually requires the drafting of the framework itself and the detail and the rules, which is where we're in the weeds at the moment, working through both the development of protection mechanisms, but also how they interface with the existing intellectual property rights system and the biodiversity, biodiscovery systems that are all around us. One of the key components of that is he puna mātauranga, the restoration where there has been such degradation of Indigenous communities and their knowledge systems, the restoration of that, of leadership, of accountability, of reo, of tikanga within our communities. So rather than just landing a Tiaki Taonga framework and then expecting those communities to uphold it and uplift it, we have to be actively supporting those communities to be ready for this, to increase their literacy around what actually their rights are, and to make sure that they are capable and have the capacity and the resources to go toe with those who are seeking to use / exploit mātauranga Māori. One of the challenges, of course, so that's he puna mātauranga. It's a shout out to those within this room who are obviously tied back to your kaitiaki communities, to know that there is both a work stream there has been resources put into that as well. There's a Te Whai Hua Fund, which is jointly managed by the taumata and by Te Puni Kōkiri, which has been actively supporting kaitiaki projects to increase this. There is also, I think, a really important reach back to those 6 claimant iwi who first took the claim, and they have been involved in their own tuku or legacy projects supported to empower them as well. And then beyond the 6 claimant iwi, there is an outreach by way of mandating and representation to a taumata that is going to seek to gather kaitiaki at a national basis in order to start the kōrero, the whakawhitiwhiti kōrero with the Crown around how those remedies can actually be underpinned by both international and domestic law. So that's part of the work stream that's happening. Turning to the international side, there's been a bouquet to the Crown. Here's a brickbat. So that treaty is a woeful outcome after 25 years of talking about this. It doesn't really do anything more than what is the baseline that already exists in Aotearoa around disclosure of origin. I absolutely acknowledge the work that's gone in. Manu Ma, that's not, and I know you'll know this, it's not a criticism of you at all. Many, many people over many years have been trying to open up the minds of those who control the resources in an international sense to see the benefit of the Indigenous perspective and place that at the centre of what we're trying to do. Ultimately, this treaty is a rubber stamp of what the vested interests around intellectual property rights have. The system remains intact. So my challenge, I suppose, is twofold. Substantially, we have to aim so much higher than what that treaty has positioned us internationally. And my cry to the Crown is don't see that as a tick box, because that falls woefully short of the protection mechanisms just in the patent sphere, let alone the issues of traditional cultural expression and the other challenges that we have around intellectual property rights. But even within that, there is no compliance, there's no penalties, it comes down to goodwill, and I'm also doubtful about just how committed the ministers are when over so many years it would have been a show of good faith to have signed the Nagoya Protocol, and we still don't know whether that's going to happen or not. So that's that in terms of substance. In terms of process, in great comment from Manu about this being really arbitrary, the way in which you as Māori are represented in the international stage. So this is an age-old kōrero. 1995, the tribunal granted urgency to Y262 because Māori weren't adequately represented in international fora. 1995. And we still don't have, we've got really good people, we've got entities that primarily focused around the trade, but are reacting to a system. We don't have the Crown enabling, and we don't have Māori establishing a really clear, concise, comprehensive voice that can engage with the Crown in a partnership sense facing the international community. It is a dire need. The fact, there's a throwaway comment there before about MFAT. I can say it, MFAT are not acting in a treaty-compliant manner and haven't for decades. So Y262 Taumata Whakapumo is about partly holding the Crown to account also to aim higher and higher as to what does tino rangatiratanga for you as Māori actually mean internationally. And I was just talking great to hear the kōrero from our Indigenous representatives from Australia. That's where the real power lies too, is the Indigenous to Indigenous voice. And I know that that's part of the solutions that we are focusing in that space. There's so much to cover. It's sort of really hard to know, and I'm going to stop now. I just wanted to give I guess, I'm preaching to the converted, but I felt it was really important to talk about te reo Māori. What we're finding as we're working through solutions, and this is a challenge I know that you'll be facing also as researchers, is to make sure that we don't just rely on terms like benefit sharing, ethical frameworks, and getting further and further away from the reo, from the language. It's trite, isn't it, to say that ko te reo te waka, te mātau, e kawea nei i te mātauranga. It's the canoe that's carrying the knowledge. But what I've noticed is that we need to be hard on ourselves as researchers, as technicians, to make sure we are plugged in to mātanga reo, for those who are who are living and breathing te reo Māori to make sure that when we come out the other end, we are carrying the mātauranga safely, but also with real integrity as to what the thoughts of those kaumātua and kuia were. Otherwise, we do run the risk of ending up in cul-de-sacs that are called Māori names, but inhabited by people who really have got no understanding or connection to why that Māori name is the name of their street. So that's a challenge for us, and it's no criticism of anybody. It's a challenge we all share, is to te aki te reo Māori I tēnei horopaki. We've got some other work streams that are going on, which I want to just note for a branding exercise, if you like, I don't know, part of the collaboration. Y262.nz is a website there that Katie and her team have been really helpful in establishing a way for all of you and others within the kaitiaki communities to connect to what's happening there, and for us to reach back out to you. So I really do ask that those who are interested either at a research level or a kaitiaki community level to be in touch. Katie gave me a figure the other day. We've been engaging over this last 3 or 4 years with approximately 18,000 kaitiaki around the motu, hearing key messages as part of what we call te whare pū kōrero, the house that's gathering the kōrero, which provides a really solid quantitative and qualitative database for us to be capturing the key messages and what is wanted by kaitiaki. The challenge now is to synthesize those into the solutions that we're looking at. So we're here to both learn and to share. In terms of the access and benefit sharing models, I just want to say that there is both the substance involved in that, of course, and really doing a deep dive, what does benefit sharing actually look like in a meaningful way for a kaitiaki community, because it doesn't necessarily just mean access to profits, not at all. And so we need to be far more creative and innovative and listening to kaitiaki needs within their community, and then building that into the relationships, contractual or otherwise, with those who are seeking to use the mātauranga. The other one is process. There is a huge disparity of resources, as you know, between those who are being engaged with the holders of the traditional knowledge, both at a literacy level, access to legal advice, resourcing within the community themselves. We all know as kaitiaki the challenges that you face in your communities, the plethora of mahi that needs to be done. So we are really concerned too to make sure that the framework, the Te Aki Taonga framework, establishes a parity of resources to be able to engage. And then there's the elephant in the room, and I really enjoyed your kōrero, Bruce, on behalf of the CRIs. Massive change, probably you are realising this, that from where the CRIs were originally, when we were first in the Waitangi Tribunal, they registered as interested parties to protect their own interests. And certainly we're not as proactive as you've made out there in terms of your kōrero. And it's really neat to see the change in attitude, and we need to build on that. But where is the incentive for those who are seeking to appropriate mātauranga Māori and taonga to engage in a fair and appropriate manner? And that's why we need actually the real hard nub of it is we need penalties and compliance requirements. We need the Crown to come along and support this tikanga framework. Otherwise, it's just going to carry on from the, we're going to lose our people and our knowledge. But that's just a slight negative and a challenge for us. Really hard to condense all that. So just a mihi to you all. Is that enough? I think that's plenty. All right, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora koutou, kora onga whakata toka iwi, so ko poku tapu toku maunga, ko te ara e te awa, ko hara toa me take timu oku waka, kora onga whakata toka iwi ko Ngāti Maru, toku hapu ko KatieLee, toku ingoa. So great to see you all today. I feel like this has been a really good turnout. I've been really looking forward to today for a long time. So this workshop today culminates kind of the end result of a 3-year bid that we've been doing through SIFTI around IP for Māori in New Zealand. So a bit of my background, I come from a legal background. I studied here at the University of Waikato doing my law degree. I was admitted to the High Court as a barrister and solicitor, and I started working at Te Kotahi 3 years ago when this project started, and it finishes now in June. you'll see before you a couple of publications that we've just put out this week that I'll speak to in a minute, so I won't get too delved into that now. But a couple of the things I do, I specialise in Indigenous intellectual property, genetic resources, digital sequence information, and I do a lot of work at the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, representing Māori there at the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. Recently this year, I've also been the Pacific Indigenous representative at the Informal Advisory Group for the UN on DSI. So for those of you who aren't familiar with DSI, DSI is essentially the genetic coding attached to a genetic resource. So you will take a genetic resource, you'll code it, and that comes out with the base pairs, the A, T, C, G, and that sits in a database that you can then use to do your research, whether you're looking for particular components within the DNA, or you're comparing it in the aggregate against other DNA samples to find something that you're looking for. And one of the biggest problems within DSI at the moment is that there is not a lot of provenance metadata attached to that. So what that means is you don't necessarily know where that DNA has come from or which Indigenous community it's attached to. And especially when you're using this DSI in the aggregate, which is you could be using thousands upon thousands of sequences at once and using AI to sort through it, for example, it's hard to kind of figure out how you gain consent of the communities that provided that genetic resource originally. And because DSI is not considered legally a genetic resource, even though we know it has a whakapapa to the resource, legally they are not the same. And what that means is that DSI is, as it's not a genetic resource, it's not covered by the Nagoya Protocol. And this has created a bit of a legal Wild West where you don't have to have free prior informed consent, you don't need mutually agreed terms, you don't need benefit sharing. And so a lot of the genetic resource research that is being done out there these days is not being done by going out into the whenua, taking a sample and sequencing it. You're going into a database and finding a pre-existing sample and using it without necessarily knowing where it comes from or whether you can in the first place. And legally, you're still entitled to currently do that. So what the CBD is currently doing is that they're trying to put some provisions in place and protocols around how you operate using DSI in a respectful manner, especially for Indigenous communities. And because there has been a Wild West for so long, there is this current status quo that is being quite hard to challenge, because in science and innovation, people are very used to doing things a certain way and they don't want to get caught up in this bureaucracy of, oh, now I have to go talk to these people and get this consent, and by the time that you get all of that, you want to get your research done as quickly as possible. So for science and innovation, they want some very clear guidance on how to operate properly, respectfully, and in a legally compliant manner. And for us as Indigenous people, we want to stay connected to our data. We want to have those conversations. We want to see benefit sharing for use of our resources. And so what's currently coming out of that is a multilateral fund, which is going to be an international fund in which when people use DSI at some point along the value chain, we haven't figured out exactly where, they will deposit some funds into the fund. And then the fund will then go out to what we're hoping is grassroots community projects for conservation. That's being pushed back a little bit because they want to see transparency and things like that, but with who's receiving the money and what are they doing with it, and is it actually being done to help enhance biodiversity. And there's a lot of conversations about what they're using the terms developed and undeveloped, or developing countries, and mega diverse and non-mega diverse countries. So you see some arguments that the most diverse countries are often undeveloped or developing countries, is the terminology. And so when you see countries like New Zealand that are considered developed but also mega diverse, we don't want to see our resources being used, but because we're not developing, not receiving any kind of priority in the funds being diverted back to our communities. So it's quite a complex space to be navigating at the moment, and it's quite an exciting time. It's been going on, the DSI conversation in the UN has been going on for about, I want to say 2 years, since COP15 they really started kicking that off. And, what else was I going to say? Oh, I also work in the 8J part of the CBD, which is about traditional knowledge use and protection and safeguarding it and enhancing it for these purposes of conservation and biodiversity. So for us as Māori being in this space, I really recognise Maui Solomon, who was there at the start, and for a while it's kind of hard to see some consistency of Māori representation within these international fora. When I first stepped into this role at the CBD, I wasn't quite sure who had been doing this work before me, and I wasn't quite sure who else I could talk to about how I go about stepping into this space, especially as an early career researcher and coming into this as a fresh young person and not knowing the whakapapa of the work behind it. It was quite challenging at first, so I really tautoko that need for having a really solid Indigenous international representation and having a community behind us for when we're in these fora, knowing that we're going with the mana of the communities behind us. So I do a bit of that. I also do a little bit of work in benefit sharing, genetic resource use. I work a lot with local contexts and their traditional knowledge, notices and labels. And so I really tautoko that initiative because one of my really big passions at the moment is provenance metadata, as I was saying. So finding new and innovative ways to really reconnect our communities with our data is important to me. So one of the things I would say to take away, or one of the biggest messages I want to impose upon you is to be brave and really think about how do you push back against things where, you know, people want to use our resources but don't know how. We already know what we want out of our relationships. We already know the needs of our community, and we already know if we were to turn around tomorrow and get $1 million out of this fund into a community, I'm certain they could turn around and say, great, we could use that for our language programs, we could use that for our biodiversity programs and our whenua. And so there's no one right way to benefit share. There's monetary and non-monetary benefits, but non-monetary benefits also have, they cost as well. And so just to have a really good think about, you know, if you were to turn around tomorrow and have a financial contribution to your community, what would your priorities be? And yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now because otherwise I'll keep talking and talking, and I've also got the guidelines to talk about later. But yeah, looking forward to the Q&A session of this korero. Kia ora.
Hi, I won't say much because I already gave a presentation, but just a bit of background. My PhD was on looking at protocols that are used by cooperative research centres. So these are networks that bring together universities, state government organisations and private sector and also not-for-profit. When you put protocols into those particular institutional situations, they change. They change significantly, but also they don't change at the same time. So there's a fundamental paradox that exists, or a contradiction exists when you move. We know this. When you move between systems, there's the things that happen and the things that don't happen, and they all exist at the same time. And that's the difficulty of what we're existing is, how do we engage in a legal and economic system when we know that that's not the system that we want to be using? We need to be using something else. The last thing I want to say is language is important. A pathway is something that currently exists because someone's trodden it before, but actually we're not looking for pathways, we're looking for opportunities, we're looking for, it's the dream we're looking for, right? So we need to step back and look at the language. We need to remember that it's not a pathway of benefits we're looking for, it's a dream for a future, and the benefit is one of the mechanisms, and the dream is how we get there. So be mindful of the words that you use. If pathway is not the word that you want to use something else. If benefit's not the word you want to use. I think of it as a dream for love. That's basically what we're trying to do. So just be mindful about the language. When you come to using words that you have to translate into English, get out of the thesaurus, and Dan's going to laugh at me right now, and look at the etymology of the word. Go back and look at the history of that word so you get the right word. Thanks.
Awesome. Kia ora, kia ora. No, that's an incredible contribution, and some big ideas in there, some big challenges for us as well. I'm just going to open it up because we're kind of pushing on towards another kai, so more food. So I want to open it up to the floor if there's any questions of our panellists. We've got the mic ready somewhere. Anna, Wallace has got the mic, so ready. So it's your turn to ask a question. Otherwise, I've got some. Kia ora.
Tēnā tātou, ko Tori McNo tōku ingoa, he uri o nō Ngāti Raukawa, me te aroa Ngāti Tahu Ngāti Whāua hoki. Tēnā tātou, I just wanted to quickly mihi to all of the rangatira in this room. I've definitely heard some of you speak before, but just kind of hearing you all together and also kind of not feeling as alone in this space is just a nice feeling in itself. So just a huge mihi for all your mahi. Thank you for everything you do, because I know when you go out there and actually get down to the nitty gritty, it can feel pretty isolating just hearing what you were saying there. E hoa. I just had a quick question. There's been a lot of kōrero about us being able to get to an international stage and what that looks like. What are the barriers to that? Do you think it's a capability and capacity thing? Is it a pūtea thing? Is it just an organisation thing? And how can, I'm just acknowledging, from my perspective, we work in a tangata tiriti organisation, which is typically more well endowed. And I guess as we search for answers around how we can provide and understand what our benefits might be to our communities, this is one way I think we can practically help. So yeah, that's the pātai. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Well, some of the barriers that I observe for the IFB within the CBD is often capacity. In terms of you're going into these international spaces where they're using a very complex and diplomatic language that's very different to the kind of colloquial style that we speak to back home. So going into these very diplomatic spaces, we have to be very careful about the way that you phrase things, the words that you use, and just making sure that you're saying exactly what you mean in a way that's not going to ruffle too many feathers, but at the same time make effective change. And so there's that part as well, as you know, you need those governance skills and that kind of diplomatic skills, as well as you need to have a really good understanding of the whakapapa of the work being done in that international sphere. So you'll find that, especially for me going into it for the first few times, I'd say, well, why can't we do it this way? And they'll say, well, we've already discussed that, and this is why it wouldn't work. So really kind of knowing the history of the work that you're doing is quite important. I find I get a lot of value from the community that I have with us. So John and I go to a lot of these things together, and they're often international, so you're going overseas, or they're in a time zone that suits the Americas and the Europe, so you'll have a lot of 3 a.m. meetings, which I'm quite well known for. So it's a lot of personal work that you have to do to make sure that you're on top of your game in the middle of the night. And also I feel one of the biggest challenges, for at least for me, is knowing who to talk to at home. Say I've got a bit of text that I want to circulate between my own people and my own networks to say, is what I'm saying actually in line with what we want to be presenting? Because a lot of the time I'll come up with some text and I'll circulate it and say, well, what do you guys think? But a lot of our community members are very busy. They've already got so much on their plate that they don't necessarily have the time to sit down and think critically about a really heavy, like word-heavy diplomatic piece of text and give really good, insightful things. So a lot of people will read it and say, I mean, I don't understand all of it, but it makes sense, kind of. And so just making sure that you find pathways to get really good feedback, so that you go there knowing that you can back yourself and back that you're standing up for your community in a way that really represents what they want. Would you add to that, John?
I do, I agree. It's next week when I go back home, not next week, I'll go home tomorrow. Next week, I've got a meeting next week around, it's one of the key things actually that came up in Geneva with KatieLee was, you know, her picking up the speaking role, but not having that information, because there'd been a whole series of things that had happened previously. So it really started to, when I was in the department, I developed what was called Dugal Jumbler. You know, so I told my team that anything you create, you need to put your name to it, your mob's language to it. So basically Dougal is bring together, put in a heap, and Jumbler means two. So it was agency and group. And basically with government, their systems, end up becoming legacy systems because of change, MOG changes. So basically what I did was put on a young IT programmer, and DJ was actually, you did projects from that thing. So every email was sent from there, every document was in there. Someone left, it was still in the system. So someone coming in on a project could quite easily pick it up, and that was available to every EPA person in the state. They could jump on. It had a positive and defensive protection mode. So things that are only were open to the public, more or less, and public being staff, was open. Where it was private, you had to come back, and it was me at the department that had the say about, how to go forward with those things. So I was setting it up. So I'll go back next week, and one of the key things is the Resilient River Skies, which I helped develop. One of the scientists there helped develop the state's integrating traditional knowledge into river management. And they're keen to back us now to build a system that, and it sort of came out of the rainforest area. And why the stuff that resonated with Katie in Geneva when we was there was we need to communicate with 20,000 plus bummer in the rainforest. And me thinking about knowledge systems, and what I'd done before was to build a new system where what we'll do is use AI, and depending on the digital footprint that you have, email, Instagram, mobile, Facebook, whatever it may be, if a piece of information is there for, and this is the important part, the knowledge and the cultural authority rests with our clan family groups. So you want that decision making to come from the ground upwards. So basically when we send something out, everyone will get it like that straight away. No gatekeepers, and it goes straight through. So that's going to be a really interesting project, because then the flip side, and I'm glad Mary had a yarn to her today because of that friend of mine with the ISO mapping who'd passed now. His children and other clan family young ones now run that corporation, Chulungan Aboriginal Corporation. And I was thinking about, how do I make Dave's knowledge live? And as Mary said, well, why don't you set, because I was thinking about AI in that space as well. And so she said, why don't you set up, what do you call it, Mary? David Claudia AI. So I thought DJC AI. So his children, if they're dealing with fire, if they're dealing with uncha, if they're whatever they're dealing with, they're going to be able to look into every paper that David's been involved in, every email David's been, and it's like David will be there still talking to them. And that can happen for generations. So I'm really thinking about the way these systems actually operate in terms of over the horizon, and even down to things like the claims, the native title claims in Australia. So I've just had a chat to my family saying, we need to get into this space. So if you think 250 generations of my family down the track, and what we're going to do is use the claim, which is recognised and confirmed in common law and the Native Title Act, but where it actually comes from is actually traditional law and custom. That's how you get it. The physical connection you have to country in terms of previous or current. But there is a QUD number, which is the federal court number. I want to take that number. My great-grandfather, his number in that claim, the apical ancestor, is 2 and in brackets 3. And then for me, all it'll have is 5M1. This person is the 5th generation from that person, male, and the first male in that generation, and have that run right across time. So it could be 250F7, but you will know where in that clan family group that person sits and who they're connected to, and has been recognised under common law. Early thinking, but thinking about what I was trying to show in the maps up there was about trusted systems. And trusted systems out of Anzac are those things like regional ecosystems, spatially, a map in terms of a protected area. So there's all these trusted systems where then when we sort of overlay that on top of a cultural landscape that we map out, and it becomes a consistent thing that's used in planning, then we're down that track of starting to get really solid ground. Yep.
Incredible. Whakapapa. Got a question at the back.
Kia ora koutou. Ko mosa taukiri toku ingoa no mga tautiri oku tupuna ag research. Unfortunately, I work with the Crown. But I'm really interested, John, about the spatial technology. And I think years ago, I've been with ag research for, I don't know, nearly 25 years, I suppose. But I did work on a trial with the P21, if anyone remembers that, is the trial using satellites and so on, and they used it in Australia. Now, back in those days, this was back in 2002, they were collecting soils from all around Aotearoa and the motu, different motu, and I kept them all, and I was the one who had to go in and assess them all, and I was looking at the locations, and I knew then, way back in those days, that these need to be protected. So what happened was, only about 2-3 years ago, I still have all the soil samples, all the data on it, all the information where they were marked, GPS, or reliable GPS we had in those days, the exact coordinates of those soil samples. Very important, but also with this technology, whānau, and I don't whether you've ever done it, is to look at it, how to know what species we have out there, because now they have the technology with hyperspectral, which you probably know about, and identifying our native to exotic species out there, and use these satellites. I mean, unfortunately, their project didn't work because we got too much cloud cover, but it worked okay in Australia. It was fine. But it's about collecting sustainability. What we take, we put back. And there's so many people out there, businesses out there, and non-Māori included, that take, and they're not putting back. And I know that that Order are putting stuff, they're putting, replacing as they go along. But I think that's this technology, and we've discussed it as well, that even we might have like a hard drive of our own stuff that's protected with us, that can't go and just taken advantage of. Anyway, ngā mihi kia koutou. Kia ora.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Can I just make a last point? Sorry, what was your name?
Musa.
Musa, you raise a really good point. What's in my brain, in which I'll go to this project, the chief investigating role that I've got coming up, is I want to test a theory that I've got, and if I'm right, to me, I think it's going to be a game changer, and I say that in terms of property rights. You know, I've looked at the legal precedents of Australia from Yana versus Eden about crocodile, Gamachi versus Commonwealth, which is, you know, around part of the Constitution, section 51, 31. That's about acquisition, and that's about just terms, on just terms and consent. There's others, Timber Creek, the precedents around the loss, the cultural and spiritual loss on country. And it all comes back to property rights. And property rights for me is, as Professor Black said in the Yana versus Eden case, you know, people think that property is an object or thing. It is not. Property rights is the legal notion. It's every conceivable relationship you have with that thing or object. And why you see in terms of the government, in terms of looking at that aspect, is they do not have absolute or full beneficial ownership of property. They have qualified ownership. Species move. You know, move from one state to another. Right? So it's things like that. But what's in my brain is, what if we can prove that, as KatieLee said before, around you know, your DNA, you know, your markers, your SNPs. What if we can prove that this marker that is in that plant or that animal actually came from human first. I'll give you an example. You mentioned soil. So using soil, parent soil, the rocks that it starts from, and the acidic processes of rain and biological matter, I was thinking that what occurs with all of our peoples in terms of we have decomposition sites and human biological matter is going into that soil, and if it's permeating into other species. That makes a real, you know, as the key questions are, what are those real intersections between nature and man, you know, or nature and human? It's something that's stuck in my brain. I think I'm going to, part of this new project, maybe try and test that, yeah.
Awesome, kia ora. No, thank you. Now we're eating into lunchtime. Lunchtime now. But there's just heaps of beautiful kōrero that's on the floor, but also out there. And so I encourage each and every one of you to grab our panellists and have a kōrero with them over a kai and a cup of tea. Because I've got heaps of pātai too, with especially for Leo around representative organisations and how we build capacity to go international, go global, do stuff local, and all of our rōpū that are around the place. But I'll take it over lunch. And so just really want to thank our panellists once again for their wonderful contribution. Kia ora.